morning, everybody. We are so excited for you meeting in homes and community today, and we can't wait to hear your stories. There are a few things we still wanted to make sure that you knew about that are coming up. First of all, tonight we have a worship night, 6 to 7:30, so we'd love for you to come to the Parkway campus and participate in that. This next week, we also have a week of prayer. You can go on the app and sign up, find an hour during the week that would work for you to come in. There are prompts in the room. There are different things that kind of help you walk through an hour of prayer, but we'd love to have you participate in that. The next thing that I'm going to talk to you about is next Sunday, starting on the 13th, we're starting our Advent season. So there's going to be opportunities for you to step in, to be able to give during this Christmas season. We have partnered with City Team for a really long time. We do a party for them. We adopt the guys that are in the program. And then we also partner with the schools. And the schools let us know about families that need things and need some help during the Christmas season. So you'll be able to pick some opportunities there. And then finally, we want to remind you again about the marriage conference. It's happening November 18th and 19th. So Friday evening, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, we're going to talk about the theology of marriage, communication, intimacy. We're going to have times all together in a big room with teaching. We're going to have times talking around a table, and we're going to have breakout sessions. Now, if you are single, but your desire is to potentially be in a relationship, we would encourage you to come too. We've had you in mind as we have been planning for this. And there will be topics that are going to be addressed that are great for us, just growth as humans in our relationships. So please don't feel like this isn't for you. We'd love for you to be there too. You can register on the app or the website, and that's it. We hope that you guys have a really good time together today.
Hey, Grace Chapel, it's so good that we are meeting in living rooms today. And just can't wait for you to have this experience in living rooms and homes. Maybe you're meeting some new friends. Maybe you're making new friends. Maybe you're hanging out with people that you've known for a long time. And here's the focus for today. We're going to spend some time in the Word, then we're going to give you a chance to take a pause and actually have conversation. We wanted to set up today for you to not just sit listening, but actually engaging with each other. And the whole focus we're going to talk about today is, what does it mean to be part of God's household? Like, what does it mean to be the family of God? And I'm reminded of a couple summers ago, my family, we did a road trip. We've always dreamed about doing this. Getting an RV was kind of this epic bucket list. And maybe you've done a lot of road trips as a family. We've been saying here as a church over the last several weeks that destination determines direction. That if you want to get together as a family and go to Disneyland, like, you have a destination in mind. And so just playing that out with us as a family, we had a destination in mind. We wanted to go to Yellowstone. That was a bucket list for us. We wanted to get an RV, never done that before. So we rented the motorhome, we got inside, and we did the road trip. It was awesome. Like, for us, it will be forever a great memory built with all kinds of like Kodak moments in our mind, in our heart. And that is a great picture of really what it means to be the church. We were a family, but we had a destination in mind. We were going somewhere together. Like, we didn't just get up one day and go, let's just jump in the RV and see where it takes us. That could be fun too. But we actually had a destination in mind. We were looking forward to experiences that we were going to have together. And I can look back now and see every time we pulled over, every stop that we did, we took our breath, we took in what we were seeing, and we were building these moments together. That's exactly the picture I believe that Jesus had for the church. It's why it's so important that we actually are saying, let's not meet in a big building, in a big room. As great as that is, let's meet in homes, because that's the feel of families. I want to take us to just a couple of passages of Scripture. Listen to this. Paul says it this way in Ephesians 2, verse 19. He says this, that you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but you are fellow citizens with God's people, and also you are members of his household. We've been saying this before too, that the word for household there in the Greek is the same word we get for ecosystem. And we've been talking a lot about how we live in a world that's pushing an ego system. Ego it's serving to myself. It's all about me. It's all about what I can get out of things. But being a part of God's household is an ecosystem. It's different. It's like when you gather together, you're not just in it for yourself, you're actually in it for what others need. And there's something beautiful, something amazing that happens when people get together. Jesus is the centerpiece of that community. And we're there to not just serve ourselves, but we're there to serve each other, love each other, and be in community together, just like a family's supposed to be. Here's the interesting thing. We've been talking a lot about discipleship. It's crazy though, but when you get out of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which is all about identifying the followers of Jesus as his disciples, then you get to the book of Acts and things open up. There's this movement of Jesus followers, but something happened in the book of Acts that changed the language and the way that Jesus followers started to identify each other. They didn't just call each other disciples, actually it shifted. And they started to refer to each other as brothers and sisters. So much so that after you get out of the book of Acts, the rest of the New Testament, they never refer to themselves as disciples anymore. Of course, they were disciples of Jesus, but the way they referred to each other from that moment forward was, hey brother, hey sister. That's the language of family. That's what God has called us to be in. We are part of his household. But notice that Paul also said you are citizens of God's household, meaning that you represent citizenship of a nation or a place. And we're called to be citizens of the kingdom of heaven. So what that means is we're not just together like a dysfunctional family. We're meant to be together as a family that has the DNA and it has the essence and the values of the kingdom of God. So when we gather as God's people, as family, there should be something distinct, something separate, something special and unique, that it's almost as if when we gather as family, we become a reflection of what family looks like in heaven. And when you look at how we interact with each other and we carry each other's burdens, we love each other, we work through reconciliation different than the way the world just wants to cancel each other. We actually go through the hard work of restoring relationships so that when we do that, we're living with a value system, we're living with the ecosystem of heaven, even as we're gathering as family. And the way that we interact with each other, the values that we live out, the world should look at that and go, that is so unique, that's so distinct, that's so special, because that's what it means to be part of the household of God. And here's the interesting thing. Let me just read another passage. Paul says this just a few verses later. He says, and in him, this is speaking of Jesus, you, as that household of God, you are being built up together. Like when we gather as family, we're building each other up. We're encouraging each other. We're helping each other live more like Christ. We're following the values of Jesus together. And we're not just doing this in isolation. We're actually there. You're known and you're supported and we're encouraging, building each other up. That's exactly what he says. But watch this. He says, not only are you building each other together as the household, as family, he says, but you actually become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit. You actually are hosting the presence of God. So where you're at right now, whatever home you're meeting in, just think of it this way. You're meeting as a family. But when we engage with each other with the value system of heaven on earth, it's in that togetherness that we are actually hosting, not just each other. So take a moment right now, look at the people you're sitting with. You're actually not just hosting each other, you are hosting the presence of God. We talk a lot about the presence of God. But when we meet together as a household, as families, in community, one of the things that God set up for us was that as we engage with each other, God's presence can be so thick, so real, so known. Even Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am with you. So I want you just to imagine right now, as you're laughing, as you're crying, as you're encouraging, as you're speaking, whatever's happening in your togetherness right now, the family of God is meant to be a hosting dwelling place for the presence and the Spirit of God. It's meant to be a supernatural experience that we have with each other. And this is why I'm going to take you to another passage that I think is super important for us. See, Peter, who was a disciple of Jesus, Peter was the one, if you remember, he was so ambitious in following Jesus, the one that denied Jesus, but Jesus restored him. That same Peter that Jesus said, it's on your confession of faith that we're going to build the church, and who Jesus is as the rock, and he's the foundation of this. That same Peter was writing to a group of early Jesus followers, and they were struggling because the world that they were living in was so anti-Jesus. Maybe you feel that way. Maybe as you look to follow Jesus as a disciple, you're trying to figure out how does the rhythms and the values of Jesus line up with the values of the world, and there's this tension. Maybe it's the place you work. Maybe it's where you go to school. You're a student. You're a high school student, junior high student. You're a young adult. You're in college. and you're like, man, it seems like everybody out there has a value system, and it's not as popular, the value system of Jesus, and you're trying to figure out, how do I live in that? And maybe you're not surrounded by people who share those same values, and so you might actually look foolish to them. You know, the Bible tells us that sometimes the ways of Jesus looks foolish to the world. And so as you're trying to live those things out, like, where's your support system? Like, where's your family that shares those same values to encourage you, build each other up? We all need that. This is why Peter was writing some words of encouragement. Let me just read these to you. He says it this way. He identifies himself by saying, hey, I'm Peter, an apostle of Jesus. This is in 1 Peter 1. He says, I'm an apostle as Peter. He says, this message is to God's elect, and then he uses this language, exiles scattered throughout the provinces. See, these were individuals that were trying to follow Jesus, but they were exiles. We feel that way in our culture right now. We can feel like we're exiled, like the way that we follow Jesus doesn't line up with the way of the world, and so we can feel like we're on the outside. We can feel like a spiritual refugee. We can feel like we don't have a home place. Like, where's that place that I can call home with others who believe what I believe, who host the presence of God, share the same values of Jesus? This is who he's writing to. He says, listen to this. He says, for you have spent enough time in the past doing what the pagans choose to do. And then he actually describes these things pretty vividly. He gets explicit here, and he says, you used to do the things what the world did, the pagans did. They lived in debauchery, lust, and drunkenness, and orgies, and carousing, and detestable idolatry. He says, the world is, they're surprised that you don't join them in their recklessness while living, and because of that, they actually heap abuse on you. See, what was happening was they were living in this sense as exiles. They had a value system, but the world didn't share that. And so they were at odds. When they would show up at the marketplace, at work, in places of education, they just had a way of seeing things that was different. And as they tried to live those things out, separate and distinct, not because they were better than the world, but because they were different, the world turned on them. And they started to feel that they were being abused and mocked. Even sometimes it's not aggressive, but it can be passive aggressive. Maybe people look at you a little differently, like, you believe that? You handle things differently. The way that you handle your money, the way that you look at politics, the way that you're parenting your kids, the way that you choose of what's right or wrong. As you're living those things out, those who don't share that may look at you differently. They may look at you like, what's wrong with you? Or, I can't believe you believe that. And we begin to feel this sense of pressure because we're not conforming to the way of the world. And he's writing to encourage them to say, listen, this is meant to be as God's household. You feel like you're exiles. It's in this place with God's people as family that's a place of refuge. It's a place to come. It's to take a deep breath. It's a place to exhale the problems that you're struggling with, the pressures you're dealing with, where you don't have to feel like you're trying to please the world, but you can be surrounded by people who will encourage you to stay strong in your faith. We want to pray for you. We want to build you up. That's what it means to be a part of the household of God. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a moment right now. We're going to press pause. And we're going to let you have some discussion questions that you can discuss, turn to each other, of what it means for you to experience being a part of God's household. Well, I hope you guys had a good time of just listening to each other. Maybe for some of you, this is the first time you've ever experienced this. You're like, this is so different. And maybe you engaged. Some of you were like, hey, we kept it nice and comfortable and safe. Maybe some of you went really deep and you're still going, man, I wish we had more time to keep talking. That's okay. When we get done here, you can keep the conversations going. But I want to take us to another part in that same passage that Peter is giving to us on how we go deeper as being part of God's household. Let me just read this to you. He says this in verse 7, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7. He says, hey, the end of all things is near. Now, he was saying that 2,000 years ago. I know a lot of people are saying that today, and it certainly feels that way. We feel like, is the end here? And we don't know. We don't know when the end is here, but we know, just as timelines work, every single day we move closer to the second coming of Jesus. And we know that as we look at the world, the chaos, We can look at all the things that we're struggling with, the uncertainty in our world, the confusion. Like the world is handling things differently. If you think about the things right now that just happened over the last couple years with COVID, the way that people address the pandemic and the divisiveness with politics and race issues. Now people are looking at the economy and like wondering, where is this going? There's just so much fear. There's anxiety, there's worry. And I really believe what he's going to say next is really critical for us of how we interact with each other as the household of God. So watch what he says. He says, as many of you feel like the end is here because of just what's happening in the world. Again, he said that 2,000 years ago, and certainly we can say we feel like that today. But watch what he says. He says, therefore, and anytime you read the Bible and it says, therefore, you know why it's there for. It's because he's referencing that tension of what everybody was feeling, that angst of what's going on. And have you ever sat and wondered, like, how do I make sense of these things? Well, this is what he says. He says, therefore, be alert and be sober-minded so that you may pray, and then out of that you would have the discernment or wisdom to make sense of things. See, I actually think that for us as Jesus followers, that we can look at the world around us, and we don't have to ignore or minimize that things are out there can be confusing. The world is certainly seeming like it's in a place where it is rocking and shaking. We've been talking a lot about having an unshakable faith, that in times of shakings, that we can actually be deeply rooted in Jesus. See, here's the thing, that if we're rooted together though, that we can strengthen each other, build each other up. And I'll add to that, that together in household of God community, we can make sense of what's happening in the world. See, I believe that God is calling his people right now to be people of discernment. Discernment means this. It means that we see the world through God's lens, that we make sense of the world's problems through the way that God would see them. The Bible tells us that we can actually access the mind of Christ. We can have the mind of Christ through the Spirit of God. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, when I'm looking at things that I'm facing, maybe it's parenting issues, and you're like, I'm not sure what to do. Our kids are doing this, they're doing that. I don't know what to do. What's the best wise decision for us in this season of our life? Maybe you have health issues and you're trying to figure out what treatment should we do or not do. Maybe you're trying to figure out your finances. How do you get out of debt? How do you manage your money? How do you prepare for things? How do you not live in a place of panic and fear? Maybe for some of you, it's just figuring out loneliness and you feel isolated. You're single. And there's just a lot of decisions in life, and you wish you had others around you to help you have the perspective and clarity for your life, decisions you're making. Where do you move? What jobs do you take? Do I buy this house, not buy this house? And so often we can get individualized and isolated, and I believe that as we're more isolated, that we sometimes make decisions in vacuums, or we try to make sense of the world just through our own single perspective. What he says here is, listen, be alert, pay attention. I believe he's speaking spiritually. Don't try to discern what's going on in the world through the way the world is trying to make sense of it. Because here's what's going to happen. This is going to lead to more confusion. You can turn on one news channel and they will try to make sense of the world, and you turn to another channel and they'll have a completely different conclusion or observation or perspective. And what's going to happen is the more you and I try to make sense of the world through the world's way of trying to understand it, it's going to lead to more confusion. But I believe that we can navigate with unshakable faith and a clear perspective, because he says, be alert, but be of sober mind. And I think sobriety spiritually happens in community, household of God. Think of someone who's intoxicated and go to a bar and they're drunk and they need a designated driver because their capacity is impaired. Many of us, we are living our spiritual life impaired in isolation. And when we're in the household of God, we begin to let the Spirit of God speak wisdom through each other. So it increases our discernment, it increases our judgment and perspective, that we can navigate what's going on in the world and the things in our lives. So that's a beautiful part about being a part of God's household. We gain the wisdom and discernment through each other. So we're going to take a break again right now, and we're going to allow you guys to have some discussion questions that you can engage with. Again, I hope you guys just had a great time having those conversations. I just want to share with you one last part of this passage. Peter then goes on to top it all off with the greatest expression we can have as God's household. Let me just read this to you. This is in chapter 4 again, 1 Peter 4, verse 8. He says, above all, like this is what it comes down to. Above all, yep, having discernment, having wisdom, yes, great. But he says, above all this, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And then he says in verse 9, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling, which I think that's kind of funny, to be honest with you. He says, love each other because that kind of love, it actually is greater than the offenses that we carry. He says to offer hospitality and don't be grumbling about it. What he's doing here is he's factoring in the human element of community. Isn't it so true that when we do community, here's my promise to you. If you're going to get into community, if you're going to be part of the household of God, it's messy. It's messy because we are people of mess. We sin. We're not perfect. We let each other down. So often people will say, oh, I tried Christian community or church community or small groups, whatever the language is. And then something goes south where somebody said something, it was offensive, or somebody didn't live up to an expectation, and then everybody got hurt. Let me just tell you, that's actually normal. That is normal. If you're expecting to be part of God's household and it's perfect, let me just set your expectations in the right place. That is not the way it's going to be. But what he does is he gives us here the recipe for how we engage with each other. He says, listen, put on love because it's greater than the multitudes of sins. It's like you're going to disappoint each other. You're going to have moments where somebody lets you down and somebody may have done something unintentionally or even intentionally. And it's offensive, and you felt judged, or you felt they didn't include you. Those things are gonna happen. What he says is, listen, if we have love, and it's the love of Jesus, not the love of the world. See, the love of the world is very contractual. The love of the world says, listen, as long as you're perfect to me, I'll give it back to you. But the minute that you do something to me, I'm offended, I'm gonna cancel you, I'm gonna drop you. But we're actually called to have a different kind of Jesus-esque kind of love. It's called agape love. It's the love he's using here. It's a love that is unconditional. It's a love that perseveres. It's a love that works through conflict. It's a love that says, listen, our relationship is so important that I'm going to work through forgiveness. I'm going to reconcile with you. That's the kind of love we're called to be. But here's the great part. As we do that, that's the love that represents the kingdom. It's the love that we get to put on display for the world that says they're distinct. They're different when they gather together. They're not gathering because they're perfect people. It's the way they handle their imperfections that's so inspiring and different. And we need the Spirit of God to help us with that. And he says to be hospitable to each other without grumbling. Because let's just be honest, isn't it true? Some of you are grumbling because we're like, it was so much easier just to show up on Sunday morning. I can pull in, I got my parking spot, I got my coffee, I got to hear the message, worship, and go home or go to Costco, whatever you wanted to do. You got on with your day. And there's some of us that are like, I really got to do this. Like, it's going to more time. I got to go different than my schedule. Like, hospitality means you're hosting each other. You're hosting God's presence. And it just requires more of us. It requires more sacrifice. It requires that I'm going to yield my life and what I want, my preferences to serve others. And in a culture that really gathers as consumers, we are offering a different way. It's a way that we host each other. And actually the word here for hosting, it's the idea that I'm going to host you the way I would host Jesus. See, if Jesus showed up and said, hey, I want to hang out with you, I'm not sure we would say, well, Jesus, I don't know, I've got a lot going on. And we wouldn't really grumble about that. We'd be like, Jesus, I'll do anything to host you. What do you need? How can I serve you? I just want to be with you. That's the kind of community household that we are called to host each other with. And then he says this, lastly, he says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received, meaning I have a gift from God, but he says, use what you've received to serve others and do it as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. See, right now, I just want to encourage you. Everybody that's gathering with you right now carries a grace of God. You carry something unique. Maybe it's a gift, a talent. You have something to offer each other. See, the household of God is a place to say, I have something that's not just for me. It's meant to be used for others. And that doesn't get used oftentimes on Sunday mornings. We gather as crowds and we only see a few gifts used. That's the beautiful part about gathering as household is everybody gets to play. Everybody has something to offer. It's where you get to discover your unique value and gifts and abilities. But the best way that we experience that is when we offer that as a deposit into somebody else's life. So here's what we're going to do right now. We're going to end. you're going to have your last opportunity to discuss. What does that look like for you? We have some questions to follow, and this is the last time that you're going to be able to do this. So I just want to end by praying for you and praying over this discussion time and just bless the time that we've had to meet as God's household in living rooms. Let me just pray for us. Jesus, thank you for your word. Jesus, thank you that you set us up with the model. As you lived in community, Jesus, as you model what it means to be sacrificial and selfless. Jesus, what it means to host your presence. And Jesus, I thank you for what we've experienced this morning by listening to your word, listening to your spirit, listening to each other. Jesus, I pray that what we are experiencing in living rooms right now, that would be the extension of what Grace Chapel is. Not just as we gather in the big room, but as we scatter and meet in homes, maybe a place of your presence, maybe a place of your love, maybe a place of your perspective and wisdom as we journey together as family. So I just pray blessing on everyone. In Jesus' name, amen.